Something is happening right now, right above our heads, and almost no one notices. While the world spins around headlines, political disputes, and economic crises, the sky keeps a secret that few eyes can see. A traveler silently crosses the space between the stars, passing through Mars's orbit, as if not wanting to be noticed. Its name, 3I Atlas, the third interstellar object ever detected by humanity. But there is something different about it. Different enough to make even the most skeptical astronomers frown and ask themselves, what exactly are we observing? The 3I Atlas does not behave like anything that has ever passed through the solar system. Since September 25, 2025, it has been monitored by dozens of telescopes, and everyone expected the same predictable result. When a coronal mass ejection from the sun hit it, it would react like a common comet, forming a bright tail, releasing fragments, slowly evaporating under the heat. But that was not what happened. The sun launched a storm of particles capable of melting ice and tearing rocks apart, and the 3I Atlas simply ignored it. No trace of dust, no cloud of gas, no visible tail. Instead, it kept something even stranger, an anti-tail turned toward the sun. A behavior so rare, so anomalous, that it seemed to defy the very logic of cometary physics. Calculations show that, at this moment, 3I Atlas is moving at 60 kilometers per second, getting closer and closer to Mars. The distance between them is already less than 0.2 astronomical units, about 30 million kilometers. The speed may reach 68 km/h by the end of the month. But perhaps the most intriguing thing is not what it does, but what is happening here on Earth. Because, by coincidence or destiny, the world is blind. The United States is paralyzed. Government servers are offline. Data centers shut down. NASA websites inactive. The official accounts, the ones that normally update every detail about near-Earth objects, are silent. No statement, no report, no sign, and all this precisely now at the exact moment when one of the most mysterious bodies ever observed by humanity crosses the most visible point of its route. Coincidence? Maybe, but the timing is disturbing. Without direct access to American systems, the scientific community had to reorganize in a hurry. Independent observatories, amateur astronomers, and mainly the European Space Agency, ESA, took the lead. The Mars Express and ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter probes, orbiting Mars, were programmed to capture every reflection, every variation in brightness from 3I Atlas as it passes by. It is these spacecraft, spinning silently around the red planet, that now carry our only hope of seeing the interstellar visitor up close. From Earth, the sun covers everything. Even giant telescopes like James Webb and Hubble, which recorded Atlas months earlier, are now blinded by solar brightness. No instrument can distinguish the object in the sea of light. Atlas is invisible, immersed in the sun's glare, unreachable, silent, and that is why Mars has become our only observation point. But then, something happens. Something no one expected. On October 2, 2025, the Perseverance rover exploring Jezero crater sends a set of routine images, sequences of the Martian sky at dawn. Nothing unusual, but among this data, a trace appears. A thin white streak cutting through Mars's reddish firmament. It does not follow the natural movement of the stars. It does not match camera noise. It is not reflection nor interference, an object streaking across the sky. The finding does not come from an official NASA statement, but from a user named Drew, who accesses the raw data and shares the discovery online. Within minutes, astronomy forums and networks explode. Independent scientists, enthusiasts, and specialists begin comparing angles, trajectories, and coordinates, and the result is alarming. The streak recorded by Perseverance matches exactly the predicted position of 3I Atlas at that time. Distance, direction, speed, everything checks out. If it is indeed it, and the odds say it is, then for the first time in history, an interstellar object was recorded crossing the sky of another planet. That had never happened before, not with Oumuamua, not with Borisov, not with any previous mission, an unprecedented moment in the history of astronomy, but also a moment of silence, because no one knows exactly what 3I Atlas is. On the cold surface of Mars, while the sun begins to rise among the reddish dunes, the rover Perseverance follows its routine. Robotic arm calibrated, sensors checking the soil, cameras scanning the horizon. Everything seems normal. But that morning of October 2nd, 2025, something crosses the sky and changes everything. In the raw images, there is a thin, almost imperceptible streak crossing the rarefied atmosphere, a white mark that does not belong there. The stars in the background stretch softly, following the Martian rotation. But that streak, it follows another direction, another rhythm. It is fast, precise, linear. It is not dust. It is not noise. It is something solid. The video has 9 minutes of continuous exposure, long enough to eliminate any doubt about reflection or interference. Frame by frame, the streak appears always at the same angle, with the same brightness, as if a physical body were crossing the sky, reflecting direct sunlight onto the camera lens. And then, the scientific community goes on alert. Independent astronomers from Japan, Australia, Namibia, Italy, all analyze the same file. The calculation is redone dozens of times, and in all cases, the result converges to the same point. The celestial coordinates of the streak coincide with the ephemerides of 3I Atlas. The chance of it being another object is minimal. The distance, the direction, and the speed match perfectly, but the scariest thing is not the coincidence. It is the shape of the trail. A comet, a meteor, a piece of debris. All would leave a diffuse, incandescent mark with variations of intensity and visible fragments. But not here. The trail of 3I Atlas is clean, uniform, constant, as if the material composing it were homogeneous, smooth, almost metallic. And that is where the debate begins to divide. Some scientists claim it is impossible for a natural interstellar body to have a metallic surface smooth enough to reflect sunlight in such a way. Others say that this is only an optical coincidence, a combination of angle and brightness, but no one can prove anything. The term metallic starts to circulate in private messages, but never in official statements. That word is taboo, because metallic reminds of structural, and structural reminds of artificial. Meanwhile, on forums and social networks, chaos spreads. Theories arise from all sides, from technical explanations to dark speculations. Some say that Atlas could be a lost probe, a remnant of an ancient civilization that has been crossing space for millions of years. Others believe it is an automated ship, a cosmic messenger coming from too far away for us to comprehend its origin. But the serious scientists try to remain calm. They know the unknown is fertile ground for sensationalism. Still, the doubt remains. And then another piece of data emerges. Astronomers analyze the images of September 25th and 27, captured before the coronal mass ejection from the sun, and they notice something strange. 3I Atlas already displayed an intense green emission, characteristic of diatomic carbon, C2. This kind of glow is typical of comets that release volatile gases as they heat up, but after the solar impact, nothing changes. No increase in brightness, no formation of tail, no sign of evaporation. Atlas seems immune to the sun, as if it were surrounded by an invisible layer of protection, an energetic armor that prevents the sublimation of gases. Or perhaps, as if the material composing it simply does not react to heat. In the following days, independent observatories begin to detect an abnormality. In the visible spectrum, Atlas seems almost invisible, a dim point. But in the infrared, something appears that no one can explain. A structure vibrating, pulsing, as if it were alive. The coma, that diffuse cloud that usually surrounds comets, is present, but different. Compact, spherical, with internal patterns that seem polarized layers, reacting in distinct ways to sunlight. It is as if there were energy circulating inside it. Organized energy. And then arises the question that no one wants to ask. Are we observing only a natural body? Or something that is functioning actively? While the scientists debate, NASA remains silent. No statements, no technical notes, no public transmissions. The official channels remain frozen. Only the echo of independent analyses remains alive. And each new piece of data increases the mystery. Atlas is not just crossing the solar system. It is behaving as if it knew what it was doing. Orbital calculations show that, since July, the object has maintained a surprisingly stable route, even after being hit by one of the most intense solar storms of the decade. No significant change of trajectory, no sign of deceleration, as if its structure were cohesive, resistant, deliberate. The numbers do not lie. A natural body made of ice and dust would not survive such a direct solar impact without fragmenting. But Atlas survived. And not only survived, it maintained its brightness almost identical. It is at this point that NASA's silence begins to disturb. Researchers from the ESA, from China, and from the United Arab Emirates join in a rare scientific cooperation. The Tianwen-1 and HOPE missions, both orbiting Mars, are redirected to capture optical and spectral observations of Atlas. Meanwhile, in Europe, the control centers in Darmstadt and Paris schedule coordinated scans. With the Mars Express and ExoMars TGO probes, these will probably be the closest images we will have of 3I, Atlas. And if everything goes as planned, by October 5th, the data will begin to arrive, but time is short. Each hour, Atlas approaches the sun more, and soon it will disappear again in solar brightness, perhaps for days, perhaps forever. The world watches in silence. In forums, in live transmissions, in sleepless nights before telescopes, each pixel, each variation of light is analyzed like a coded message coming from space. And what is seen does not fit any known model. The brightness of Atlas pulses at regular intervals, every 43 seconds, a periodicity so precise that it seems impossible to be random. The scientists try to justify, perhaps the nucleus is rotating rapidly, reflecting light periodically. But even the most skeptical admit, the pattern is too perfect. There is no variation. There is no deviation. It is as if Atlas were emitting a signal, not a communication signal, of course, but a physical pattern, repeated and constant. As if there were intention behind the repetition, and when someone realizes that Atlas came from the same region of the sky where, in 1977, the legendary "wow" signal was detected, a collective shiver runs through the scientific community. The angular difference between the 2 points is only 9 degrees. No one suggests a direct connection, but no one dares to ignore the coincidence. Atlas now moves toward Mars, then toward Jupiter, and then toward infinity. But before disappearing, it leaves us something that we cannot measure in data nor in graphs, a feeling. The feeling that perhaps the cosmos is looking back. The world watched, but no one spoke. While the European and Asian probes transmitted fragments of data, the heart of the world's scientific infrastructure, the American control centers, remained silent. NASA, accustomed to updating every minute of an asteroid's position, was now a shadow of itself. The monitoring panels were turned off, the servers inaccessible. Even the official science communication accounts on X, formerly Twitter, and on social networks stopped abruptly. The few journalists who tried to contact agency spokespeople received the same automatic response. Services temporarily suspended due to government shutdown. But the public was not satisfied with that. The internet boiled with questions, theories, speculations. Why, among all possible moments right now, when an interstellar object approaches Mars, would the American government completely halt its scientific operations? Coincidence? Planning? Or something that could not be disclosed? In discussion groups, some remembered that something similar had already happened in 2013. During the passage of Comet Ison, when failures and delays in NASA communications generated an information vacuum and a surge of theories. But the case of Atlas was different. Very different. Ison was a common comet. Atlas it was not. It did not react to the sun. It did not fragment. And worse, it emitted its own light, a phenomenon that no natural model could explain. The European Space Agency, pressured by the American silence, decided to act. On the night of October 3, 2025, it published a statement. The interstellar object 3I Atlas will be monitored by multiple orbital platforms over the next 72 hours. Data will be shared with the international community as soon as preliminary analyses are completed. It was the diplomatic way of saying, if NASA won't speak, we will. And so, while the Americans faced the greatest scientific shutdown since the 1980s, Europe took command of space exploration. On the other side of the world, in China, engineers of the Tianwen-1 mission reoriented the infrared instruments. In the United Arab Emirates, the HOPE probe began spectral scans of Martian orbit. In only 2 days, a global network of scientific cooperation spontaneously formed, uniting countries that rarely shared data, all looking at the same point in the sky. But what they began to find would change everything. The first data packets from Mars arrived on October 4th. Fragmented, unstable, interrupted by solar interferences. But there was something in them. Infrared images showed 3I Atlas surrounded by a kind of energized coma. It was not dust, it was not ice nor common gas. It was ionized plasma, with density around 2.4 x 105 particles per cubic meter, temperature around minus 18 degrees Celsius, but with localized hotter peaks, as if something inside the object were actively emitting energy. The sensors indicated continuous emission of ultraviolet radiation, a light that did not come from the sun, but from the very core of Atlas. In other words, it shone on its own. At that point, the term energetic anomaly began to appear discreetly in reports. The word artificial, still forbidden, hovered like a ghost over every line of text. Meanwhile, independent observatories on Earth, even blinded by the sun, managed to detect light pulses synchronized with ESA's measurements. Every 43 seconds, a new brightness peak. Always the same interval, without failure. Without variation, a pulse so precise that it seemed more like a heartbeat than a reflection. Simulations showed that if it were rotation, there would be small irregularities. But the pulses were identical, too perfect. Like a cosmic clock or like a coded signal. The scientific community, accustomed to caution, began to collapse silently. The debate ceased to be public. Discussions migrated to private groups, restricted forums, encrypted messages. What was being discovered could not be communicated in any ordinary way, and the public saw only silence. With every new minute of NASA's absence, more theories arose. Some absurd, others frighteningly plausible. A retired former employee of the agency even stated in an interview that contingency protocols had been activated. Protocols used only in the case of detection of anomalous signals of non-natural origin. The interview was taken offline a few hours later. Coincidence? Or indirect confirmation that something greater was happening? That night, in small-scale observatories around the world, something was noticed. A sudden change in the brightness of Atlas. For a few minutes, the pulses intensified, not only stronger, but faster. From 43 seconds, they dropped to 41, then 39, and then silence, nothing more. The object dove into the solar glare and disappeared completely from the visible spectrum. It was as if it had turned off. ESA operators tried to track the infrared signature, but it was lost. Atlas was now behind the sun, unreachable. All transmissions with Mars and the probes were suspended due to the annual solar conjunction. A predictable phenomenon, but one that this time came at the worst possible moment. The last data packets arrived at 0432 on October 5th. After that, nothing. Not a line of code, not a pixel of image. 3I Atlas had disappeared, but not the mystery it left behind. In the following days, discussions became more intense. Some ESA scientists admitted that the measurements made no sense. There was no dust ejection, no fragmentation, no visible heating. The object seemed made of something cohesive, resistant, and deliberate. The apparent rotation, the pulsing brightness, the anti-tail turned toward the sun, the behavior indifferent to solar ejection. None of that fit the known natural laws. And while Atlas moved away toward Jupiter, the scientific world tried to piece together the fragments of information before everything was lost in the light. The American silence continued. And for the first time in decades, humanity realized how much it depended on a single information structure. When it falls, knowledge also vanishes. It took an anomaly from the stars to reveal our own fragility. And perhaps that was the true impact of 3I Atlas. More than a visitor, it became a mirror. A reminder that when politics goes silent, science depends on cooperation, and that the universe may be far more than we imagine. And then, in the silence that followed, only one unsettling certainty remained. Atlas does not behave like anything we have ever observed. Its own light, its periodicity, its stable structure, all point to something we do not understand. And as it disappears behind the sun, one thought echoes in the air. What if 3I Atlas is not just passing by? What if it is watching? 3I Atlas disappeared. That sentence, spoken in a low voice, passed through control rooms, private scientific discussion channels, and internal transmissions of space agencies like a kind of technical mourning. It wasn't just the disappearance of an object. It was the disappearance of a historic moment, For the first time, humanity was observing in real time an interstellar visitor crossing the inner solar system. And suddenly, the visitor simply ceased to be observable. On October 5th at 0432 Universal Time, the last data packets arrived from the probes around Mars, some incomplete images, fragmented spectral readings, cut telemetry. After that, nothing. 3i Atlas went behind the solar glare and plunged into silence. It was still out there, still existed, still moved, still accelerated, but technically, at that moment, it was invisible, untouchable, intangible, beyond human reach. And that was when the strangest part of this story began. Because the silence wasn't only in space. It was here on Earth, the United States. Government shutdown continued, and with it, thousands of employees, including entire scientific monitoring teams, had been temporarily removed. That meant that NASA, which is usually the first voice to speak out in unusual astronomical situations, was now a void. No public transmission, no bulletin, no trajectory update, no communication to calm the community, nothing. And the world felt that nothing. It's hard to explain the feeling. It wasn't fear. It wasn't panic. It was something denser, more contained, a mix between frustration and unease. The feeling that something important was happening, and that for the first time in a long while, the planet's population was on the outside, knocking on the other side of the glass, trying to see in. Because there were questions, many questions. What exactly was 3i Atlas? Why didn't it react to the direct impact of a solar coronal mass ejection, when it should have formed a tail and started to disintegrate like any common comet? Why did the infrared readings show an active energetic structure around it, as if there were confined plasma circulating around the nucleus in some kind of electromagnetic cocoon? Why did it shine periodically, in extremely precise pulses repeating every 43 seconds? And most importantly, why now? Why did this object cross the inner solar system precisely at a time of an American scientific blackout, with the planet's most powerful technical infrastructure partially shut down? When Atlas vanished behind the sun, that mixture of coincidence and vulnerability became fuel. And not only for internet forums, but also for those on the inside. Because what happens in situations like this is always the same. When official information disappears, unofficial information is born. And it was exactly in this phase that the leaks began to appear. They weren't complete statements. They weren't full reports. They were fragments, sentences, screenshots of telemetry, partial transcripts of internal meetings, small excerpts hastily copied from mission logs and sent anonymously to people who knew how to amplify them without immediately setting off alarms. The first relevant leak came from within the ESA. The European Space Agency had, in practice, taken the lead. While the United States was paralyzed and other powers were still reorganizing, control centers in Darmstadt and Paris redirected their probes toward the common goal: to follow Atlas as far as possible, for as long as possible. Mars Express. ExoMars Trace Gas Orbiter. Even collaborative tracking with the Arab Hope probe and specific instruments from China's Tianwen-1 mission. That's not common. These missions were created with different purposes, different agendas, different political interests. But suddenly, all of them pointed to the same target. And although the team strove to maintain strictly technical language, something slipped out. Someone with internal access shared a line from a preliminary report. A single sentence, but one that changed the tone of the global debate in an instant. Compact coma structure, with internal patterns of energetic variation that do not correspond to the dynamics of ice sublimation. Distribution suggests organization and retention. Organization. Retention, those two words. To a layperson, they seem neutral, but to those who work with the analysis of small bodies in space, they sound almost like a siren. Why? Because comets, asteroids, natural fragments, all of them lose material when they pass near an intense heat source like the sun. That's called sublimation. The ice turns to gas, the gas escapes, sunlight ionizes that gas, and then you see the famous bright tail. This process is messy, turbulent, asymmetric, chaotic, but 3i Atlas did not behave like a body being slowly destroyed by sublimation. It behaved like something that was holding its own material. Its coma didn't seem to be exploding outward. It seemed contained around, as if there were some kind of invisible barrier holding the plasma, keeping that energized cloud close to the nucleus, preventing the structure from dispersing into open space. That does not happen with natural things, at least, not with the natural things humanity has ever seen. That small detail was enough to ignite the most dangerous kind of speculation, not for the public, but for the scientific community. Because there is a real fear among serious scientists. The fear that a phenomenon with still incomplete but intriguing characteristics might be hijacked by narratives of collective hysteria and sound like nonsense before it's even understood. It's the fear of burning a real discovery because of noise. So, while that leak began to circulate, another front, quieter, started moving. While NASA officially said nothing, engineers and researchers who were at home, unable to access internal systems, began working on personal computers using public data. Previously downloaded data, routine data. They couldn't turn on the central servers, but they could think, and they did. One of those groups began to review something many had ignored at first, the trail recorded by the Perseverance rover in the Martian sky on October 2nd. That record, which was initially treated as a visual curiosity, was now key. Why? Because it wasn't just a streak in the sky. It was potentially the first visual record of an interstellar object passing in front of a camera on another planet. And more, it could help reveal a behavior astronomers call non-gravitational acceleration. That expression sounds complicated, but it means something quite simple. A natural body should follow a predictable trajectory, governed only by gravity. But if it deviates slightly from that trajectory without a clear explanation, such as gas jets pushing the nucleus, for instance, then something else is acting there. Oumuamua, the first interstellar object detected by humanity, showed this kind of non-gravitational acceleration. No one could conclude why. The most accepted explanation was that it was releasing gas in a way that didn't produce the perceptible tails we see in common comets, but Atlas's case already started differently, because Perseverance captured not only the position of the streak in the sky, it also captured its consistency. That streak was too linear, too thin, too uniform throughout the exposure. There was no pulsing, no oscillation. Nothing indicated that fragments were being expelled and pushing the object in slightly different directions, whatever. Was crossing the Martian sky in that more than 9-minute sequence. Was moving with stability, and it was fast. Preliminary calculations pointed to speeds around 60 kilometers per second, a value consistent with the predicted approach of Atlas during that time window. But the most impressive detail came later, when the images were overlaid not with the sky over Jezero crater, but with the three-dimensional map of Martian rotation during that exact period. The result was almost impossible to ignore. The projected trajectory matched the position of 3I Atlas above Mars. But it didn't seem to pass by chance. It seemed to graze the window, as if it had passed exactly through that region of observation and then continued on, as if it knew where it was being seen. Officially, no one stated that. No one would dare to put that in a scientific report, but in closed conversations, in unrecorded calls, in meetings where cell phones are left outside, that hypothesis was raised. And just raising that hypothesis changes the game, because it means the following. 3I Atlas would not be just an interstellar body crossing the inner solar system. It would be an interstellar body that, for a few moments, was geometrically well-positioned in the field of view of the most advanced machine humanity has ever landed on Mars. And that is frightening. While these discussions were taking place, political tension was increasing. The ESA, pressured by journalists, released an extremely careful public note. The message acknowledged that Atlas presented unusual coma properties and persistent energetic activity, but classified the object as an interstellar comet. That term, comet, was chosen with surgical precision. It did not describe the object accurately, but it was safe. It was familiar. It was understandable to the general public. And above all, it did not inflame. At the same time, reports circulated that behind the scenes there was disagreement among European teams about the use of that word. Some researchers in spectroscopy and orbital dynamics argued that Atlas should, for now, be classified as an uncategorized interstellar object because of the absence of a visible tail and the atypical energetic pattern. But the final decision did not come from the scientists. It came from the political sector, calling it a comet calms. Calling it a controlled anomaly does not. Meanwhile, the remaining raw data needed to be squeezed to the last drop. because there was another threat on the horizon. Time. Atlas was accelerating toward perihelion, the point of maximum approach to the Sun, predicted between October 29th and 30. After that point, it would begin to move away, use Jupiter as a gravitational slingshot, and continue outward, toward the outer regions of the solar system. And that meant a terrible thing for scientists. If they did not understand Atlas now, they might never understand it, because this object would not stay here. It would not enter orbit. It would not be captured. It would not become a new moon or a companion asteroid, no. 3I Atlas was only passing through. It came from outside. It will return to outside. It is not ours, and when it leaves, it may take forever the answers it carried. That sense of urgency gave birth to another silent initiative. The JUICE mission, which is dedicated to the Jovian system, was not built to study comets or interstellar visitors. It was built to study icy moons, subsurface oceans, magnetic fields. And yet, engineers began to plan a kind of opportunistic observation. If orbital geometry allowed, JUICE would try to capture Atlas during its passage through Jupiter's gravitational neighborhood. This plan was not just technical. It was almost emotional. It was humanity's desperate attempt to say, "Don't go away without us looking at you one more time." But there was a practical and brutal complication. Even if JUICE managed to observe Atlas during the late October approach, those data would not reach Earth immediately. The Sun-Earth-Jupiter alignment would create a natural communication barrier. That meant whatever was recorded in October would only arrive reliably months later. In other words, during this entire critical period, the period when Atlas would be fastest, most energized, most revealing, humanity would be practically blind to it, and, in a certain sense, blind to itself. That void of information was filled in the only way human beings know how to fill a void, with narrative, and narratives began to appear everywhere. Some were exaggerated, cheap conspiracy theories created to generate fear. Others, curiously, were cold, almost too technical, as if they had been written not for the general public, but as messages between specialists. One of these narratives began with a simple question. Repeated in live broadcasts and specialized podcasts, what if it isn't just a physical body? What if it's a test? The word test stuck, because it doesn't need to say ship. It doesn't need to say probe. It doesn't need to say artificial. It goes around all those forbidden words. It is, at the same time, provocative and safe. A test of what? That was the inevitable continuation. And the answer, though no one had the courage to stamp it on paper, was implicit, a test of response. How do we react when something enters the solar system coming from beyond the usual gravitational boundaries? Who controls access to information? Who monitors? Who decides what is public and what is not? Who cooperates? Who hides? And perhaps most importantly, how long does it take for us to fight among ourselves before we look up together? It was at that point, political, almost philosophical, that the presence of Atlas ceased to be just an astronomical phenomenon and became also a social mirror. Because what Atlas did, without uttering a single word, was this. It revealed our flaws. It showed that the global infrastructure of space observation still depends heavily on a single nation, and that if that nation stops, the whole world limps. It showed that our agencies do not always trust each other. It showed that there is an immense distance between what scientists know and what the public is allowed to know. And it showed, perhaps in a cruel way, that when the unexpected appears, we still respond with silence. But the silence would not last. Because in the middle of that global data vacuum, something began to reappear, and it was not on Earth, it was on Mars. For weeks, the solar system seemed asleep. Communications remained blocked by solar alignment, and 3I Atlas was only a lost memory in the light. But on October 18th, the silence began to give way. Weak, distorted signals crossed the interference. First noise, then data, and then confirmation. The European probes had re-established contact. At the control center in Darmstadt, the first clean image appeared on the screen. A gray blur against the black background, but there was something different. Atlas's brightness was more intense, almost 10 times greater than before disappearing. The object was approaching perihelion, and readings indicated growing energetic activity. Spectral analysis showed ultraviolet emission pulses varying in intensity, always at the same interval, 43 seconds. What intrigued scientists was that these pulses were not constant in phase. At certain moments, the amplitude rose, as if Atlas were reacting to its own proximity to the sun. "This isn't just reflection," said one of the analysts. "It's excitation of active material." While scientists tried to find a physical explanation, the world caught its breath again. Newspapers, podcasts, astronomy channels, everyone wanted to know what 3I Atlas was doing. NASA, still slow in recovering from the shutdown, issued a brief note. "Object monitored in coordination with international partners. Data under analysis." Translation: they still didn't know what they were seeing. On October 27th, the ESA released the most awaited sequence. 32 images captured by ExoMars TGO showed Atlas in the infrared spectrum. At first glance, it was a sphere wrapped in a diffuse cloud. But when contrast was adjusted, symmetrical lines appeared cutting through the coma at regular angles. 4 luminous bands crossing in the center, as if energy were being channeled in opposite directions. The silence in the control room was absolute. No comet, asteroid, or natural body ever recorded had shown such a regular pattern. Simulations began. Perhaps they were only magnetic fields interacting with the solar wind. Perhaps lens interference. But the angles were too exact. 90 degrees between each beam, pulsing in the same 43-second rhythm. And then, during one of the live transmissions, something happened. At 03:17 on October 29th, Atlas reached perihelion. For 9 seconds, its brightness exploded, surpassing that of any nearby body. Then, everything went dark. Communications dropped again. The probes entered safe mode due to excess radiation. No new image was received. On Earth, the control centers registered only one last telemetry packet, a sequence of pulses that no longer followed the 43-second interval. The rhythm had changed. Now it was 37, and then silence again. For hours, scientists, engineers, and amateur observers waited for some signal to return. Nothing. Atlas had disappeared for the second time. This time, beyond Jupiter's orbit. But one last reading, almost ignored amid the noise, was recorded on ESA's servers. A faint echo, reflected in multiple wavelengths that seemed to form a geometric pattern before fading. When processed on a temporal scale, that echo resembled a signature. The analysis was archived with the note, "Possible instrumental interference. Review pending after full restoration of communications with the JUICE mission." Officially, nothing was discovered. Unofficially, no one could stop looking at those last seconds of data, wondering if the silence of space still hid something. While Earth returned to everyday life and newspapers went back to speaking of politics and markets, 3I Atlas was already crossing Jupiter's orbit, ever more distant, ever faster. And in a small room in Germany, an engineer looked at the blank screen and murmured what everyone thought, but no one dared to write in a report. The silence has broken. But what it said, perhaps we didn't understand. But this is only one of the many stories forgotten at the frontiers of time. If you've made it this far, subscribe to the channel Echoes of the Last Era to hear more tales of lost worlds, forbidden loves, and secrets hidden among the stars. Leave a like, share, and until the next echo.